played that advert is because it winds me up. It really irritates me. I've seen it on the TV a few times recently, and it really grates. But I thought it was really interesting because the reason it grates is because it kind of shows some of the paradox of the world that we live in. Because, believe it or not, we live in quite a paradoxical world. Kind of, it's a bit different, opposite kind of viewpoints, and it's like, how do these things fit together? So, in that advert, it was saying about trust your own way. Don't trust other things. Trust your own way. Oh, but by the way, trust us and buy the things we're trying to sell you. Do what you want to do. Oh, but do what we want you to do. It really irritates me. But there we go. The point I'm trying to get to is that we live in a world where there are lots of influences, and we are told to do our own thing, to be ourselves, to manage our own destiny, and at the same time, and so not to be influenced by anybody. Do what you want to do, but at the same time, we've got young people who want careers as influencers. We've got people who class themselves as influencers, and it's like, what is going on? What is this all about? So if we go to the next slide, please. I thought I'd look and see what does the world consider an influencer to be. And it probably won't come as a surprise to many of you that the definition of an influencer is given as an individual who has the power to affect purchase decisions, opinions, and behaviors of their followers or audience through their authority, knowledge, position, or relationship with their audience. Really, what we're talking about here is people on social media commonly is what the world thinks of as influencers. When people say they want a career as an influencer or they want to be an influencer, they're talking about they want to be on TikTok or Instagram and have thousands of followers, and they don't necessarily need to have knowledge or authority, they just need numbers. So it's interesting, this whole thing of influence, it's a really kind of odd world we live in around influence. And I just wanted to ask the question, are you under the influence? I try and avoid social media and TikTok, and I can be quite cynical of new technologies and new ideas in an attempt not to be influenced by them. I don't readily take things at face value and will like to ask questions why. But the fact is, if we truly want to be not under the influence of others or anything, we kind of have to live like a hermit. We'd have to be away from everything and everybody. And realistically, you'd need to do that for all your life. And so if you're doing that from a newborn, you wouldn't be alive. The reality is that it's impossible to live without being influenced. And actually, we're all under the influence of something. Right now, as I'm talking to you, I'm under the influence of gravity. I know that's not people, but it's just a fact. We are all under the influence of our surroundings. So, speaking about gravity, I thought I'd give you a bit of a physics lesson, because that's just what you came here for, right? On a Sunday morning to learn about physics. So who, apart from my family, knows what Newton's first law of motion is? And I know that Levi does, because I asked him about it earlier, and he got it wrong. No, he didn't get it wrong. He got it correct, but he put it in a very complex term. Anybody else know Newton's first law of motion? Go for it, James. No, but I'll come back to you on that one. It's close, it's a good one. Anybody else got any ideas? Go on then, Levi. Go on then, let's see on the screen, shall we? It's the fact that every object continues in a straight path or in its state of rest or in a uniform motion in a straight line unless it is compelled to change that state by forces that act upon it, which sounds very complicated, but I'll show you what that means in a moment. Okay, James, now it's your turn. What's Newton's third law of motion? Perfect. Yeah, exactly. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Exactly right. Cool. So, um, let's see the next video, because the video actually shows you a picture of Bobby the Ball, and he's going for a goal, but then there's an action put on him, there's a force applied, and it changes his direction. It changes the way he's going. And this, this is applicable this is a demonstration of physics, but it's also a demonstration of influence, because influence has the same impact on us. When people try and influence us, they're trying to apply a force, a pressure, something to make us change direction, to change our opinion, to change our way of thinking. So am I saying, yeah, and so every action has a equal and opposite reaction, but everything has the point is that everything has consequences. Every action has a consequence. I'm not saying that, if you do something good, then the equal and opposite will then mean that something bad happens. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not applying the laws of physics to, emotional states. I'm just using that as an example. Okay, but the point is that every action does have a consequence. Everything we do has a consequence. And actually, even the things we don't do, if we choose to take inaction, that also has a consequence. Many people talk about the fear of missing out, the fear of not taking action because they'll miss out on something. And that can equally have a big consequence. So we are all influenced by the words we hear, by the things we read, by the things we see or feel. We are all influenced, and we just can't get away from it. We live in a world where there are lots of influences. Now, I'm going to share a story with you. I'm going to share something with you. It's not in my notes, but it's just something that I kind of threw away from my notes, but it really kind of stirred my heart, so I just wanted to tell you about it. Basically, I just want you to kind of cast your mind into a position, right, where you're in a small boat, probably out 12 or so other people in it, but the boat's really only made for about 5 or 6. And you're in the middle of a stormy ocean, and the waves are quite high. How do you think you'd be feeling in that situation? I think you'd probably be feeling fairly terrified. The boat's too small, and the seas are high. It's a good chance it's going to capsize, and possibly you can end up dying. And that's not a pleasant thought in my mind. And I'm not talking about Jesus on the Sea of Gethsemane here. I'm talking about things that are happening now in the Mediterranean, where there are, people being trafficked. Sorry. People being trafficked and sent across from Africa in small boats that are not fit for that journey, but they are so desperate to get away from where they are living and the situation they are living in that they will do anything to move on. And there's a particular country that is a hotspot for human trafficking out of Africa. And part of the reason that it's a hotspot for human trafficking out of Africa is because it's on the Mediterranean coast, and because it's the actual borders between it and the other countries around it basically don't exist. People can come and go freely across the border. But it's also a place of deep political unrest and uncertainty. And so gangs, militia, and so on have had the opportunity to take hold in that place. And that place I'm talking about is Libya. And Libya's, I was shocked. I was shocked to hear when I was looking recently that Storm Daniel hit Libya less than a month ago. Now, anybody heard about Storm Daniel hitting Libya? A few. But what shocked me the most was that there are 250,000 people impacted, living without shelter, housing, medicine, food, water, clean hygiene because of that situation. There were 11,000 people died effectively in one day because of what happened in that situation. And what makes it worse is, again, because of this political unrest, this political situation, there is no government to sort it out. There is no government to take action. We heard about what could happen in Havering, if the council goes into whatever Dave said the section, whatever it was, is, right? But these people, there is no ruling government to take any form of action. So why is this the case? Why is Libya in such a state? Now, I appreciate that Storm Daniel happened, and that is not necessarily due to the things that the people in Libya have done, okay? But the response and the ability to respond, and the fact that it's not even publicised very widely in the media, is due to people, is due to the consequences of people's actions. It is due to the fact that the political scene was in, Gaddafi was in there, and then he was, whatever you may think of Gaddafi, and I'm not saying he's a good man, I'm not suggesting that in the slightest, but he was a strong man holding that country together. And then when there was the uprising and the civil war came, and then suddenly you got different factions clashing, and then you've got, for 12 years there has been no firm government in that country. That is undoubtedly going to have an impact and have an influence on the people in that country and the countries around. And what's worse is that outside countries have come in with their own desires, their own intentions, their own desires to influence the outcome because of the fact that Libya is a huge oil producer. And so because of greed of surrounding nations, I'm not talking about surrounding nations, I'm actually talking about, nations in Europe, nations in, close by, they've come in and they have taken actions in an attempt to influence whatever the Libyan government outcome is, that they can get preferential treatment for the oil. It's horrendous. And yet, I didn't know anything about this until I studied this week. And the fact that, as I say, it's because of all of this turmoil, we've then got people. ISIS came in 2016 and made it a hotspot for their activities in that region because there was no strong government, because there was no strong opposition. They came in, and suddenly Libya became an ISIS centre. Now, fortunately, praise God, that's not the case anymore. Things have changed. But that's why human trafficking is rife in that place. That's why human suffering is rife in that place, because of people's actions and reactions and the influence of others. So, sorry, that's my rant over. But it was something that just caught me, and I just wanted to share that. The point is that we are all under the influence, whether we like it or not. That we are influenced by those around us. And the world looks to try and desires to influence us. Whether it's the enemy or the states trying to influence the outcome in Libya, whether it's car advertisers trying to sell us vehicles, whether it's politicians trying to get us to vote in a particular way or another, whether it's the news sensationalizing certain elements in an attempt to either, get political sway or have various income from various groups, or whether it's to increase readership, whatever it is, whether it's them censoring and not sharing particular things because they are succumbing to pressure, peer pressure from other institutions, whatever it may happen to be, we are being influenced in what we hear and see. Whether it's our teachers who've got a passion for a subject who influence us for that subject. Whether it's parents who love us and care for us and demonstrate love and care, we live in a world that influences and desires to influence us. And as I said, some influences can be good, and some influences can be bad. But we need to choose. We need to make a choice and say which of the influences and all the things, all the surrounding noises, the voices, the words, the things that we see, hear and feel, which of those are we going to accept and which of those are we going to fight against? Which of those are we going to stand up to and actually say, no, I don't believe that's a lie, and I'm not going to be influenced by that. It's not easy. It's not easy. Because with so many things bombarding us, it can become wearisome to try and stand up against all the various voices. And sometimes we get voices in our head telling us this, that and the other about ourselves. And that can be really wearying when you're fighting those kind of voices in your head, as well as everything else that's coming in and hitting us. And so our default situation often is just to accept the voices, accept things as true, accept whatever people are saying, accept the news, accept what's being shared on social media, accept whatever it may be. But the good news is that we are called to be influencers. We are called to be positive influencers. Right from the beginning of time, and before the world was created, it was God's desire to bless the world. It was his desire when he created heaven and earth, he created a beautiful place for people to enjoy. He created a place where he wanted the inhabitants to live in harmony and peace. And his command to Adam and to Eve was to rule over the earth. In other words, to have influence over it, to be active in what they did. And his intention for them was that they would follow him, and in following him, they would act in a way that blessed the world. They would act in a way that actually reproduced the Garden of Eden across the whole world, that produced a place of harmony and peace for the inhabitants, that produced a beautiful place where people would want to live and would enjoy living in the presence of God. But we know, those of us that read the Bible and believe it, know that Adam and Eve, they didn't follow God entirely, and they chose a course of action. They believed the lies, the influence of the serpent, and then they chose to do, to go against what God had called them to do, which was to not eat. They didn't trust his word of what he said. When he said, "Don't eat of this particular fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil," and there were consequences for their actions. And we live in a world riddled with the consequences of those actions and actions of others subsequently. But God didn't give up on the world. He didn't say, "That's it, blown it, it's all over." When he called Abraham, if we could have the verse on the screen, I think it is. When he called Abraham in Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3, he said to Abram, "Go from your country, where your people and your father's household, from your people and your father's household to the land I will show you." Next one. Thanks. "And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So God's calling to Abram was to say, look, you're going to be a blessing. You are going to be a positive influence to this world. I'm going to make you and your family and those who follow you into a positive influence. And God's, right throughout the Old Testament, I think the next verse as well is very similar. It's when God's speaking to Jeremiah, and he said, God's speaking to Israel through Jeremiah, and he says, "O Israel, says the Lord, if you would return to me, you could. You could throw away your detestable idols and stray away no more. Then when you swear by my name, saying, 'As surely as the Lord lives,' you could do so with truth, justice, and righteousness. And then you would be a blessing to all the nations of the world, and all people would come and praise my name." God's desire is that we're a blessing to the whole world, but we have to submit to God to be that blessing. We have to come to him first and be submitted to him. We need to return to him with all our heart. For Abraham, it cost him everything. He had to leave his land, his household, his family, and he had to go to where God called him to. He had to step out in following God and leave many things behind. But as a result of that, he was able to be a blessing, or his family were able to be a blessing to the whole world. And God calls us the same. God's desire for us is the same. He said his desire is for us to be positive influence, for us as the heirs of Abraham to be those who are being a blessing to our world around us. Can we have the next verse, please? Oh, not the one I was thinking of. Okay, no worries. So just the one I was looking at was actually Matthew 5 and verse 13 to 16. And it says, "You are the salt of the world, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Two really interesting examples of influence. Salt. I'm assuming everybody's familiar with salt and knows what salt is. And I'm assuming everybody's familiar with what salt does. In that, if you take your finger, lick it, stick it in some salt, and put your finger back in your mouth, you will taste the salt. Now, salt was used for much more than just adding flavour, but that's how we generally use it. But it also was a preservative for food. So in times prior to fridge freezers, salt would be a common way to preserve certain foods. But the point is that salt would influence everything it touched. You know, if you touch salt and you got it into your hands, like if you go in the sea, in the salt water, and then you lick your hands afterwards, you get a salty flavour. Salt just it just does it. It just does it naturally. It's just what it does. You know, light. You know, and when you take a torch into a dark room, or some form of light into a dark room, I was going to say, like my super strong torch lights up the room. That's an in-joke. The torch on my camera is not very strong. But the point is that light will shine in darkness, and will just by being what it is, just by doing what it does, just by being natural, it brings light into the room. And that's because they're just doing, salt and light are just doing what God created them to do. They're just doing what they were created to do. Now, they aren't sentient beings, obviously, but we are. And if we do what God calls us to do, then we too can be influencers for good, just by being who we are. We don't have to have thousands of followers on social media to be an influencer. We don't have to have a massive following. I thought what was really interesting about that definition, you may have noticed it, I don't know whether you did or not, it was the fact of it was followers and audience. There was no real direct interaction there. It was kind of people at afar. But that's not how God calls us to be influencers. He doesn't say, I want you to influence people from afar. We are able to influence those right in front of us. You know, we don't have to have thousands of followers to be an influencer. We can influence the people we meet with day by day, the people we touch, the people we speak with. And just by being us and by submitting to God and following God, just like the salt and the light, naturally salt influences and everything it touches, we too can influence everything that we touch and everyone we meet. God's not really looking for you to have all the numbers on social media. And if you've got lots of followers, fantastic. Go for it. But that's not what God's, he doesn't discount us because we don't, or I don't. He doesn't discount me for that. I could be an influencer to just one person. Something I say, something I do, something I share, some act of love or kindness could change somebody's life. I wanted to look up the name of somebody, and I'm really sorry I didn't get the name. But I remember hearing the story about a Sunday school teacher who, nothing amazing, kind of Sunday school, I think, in the Midwest America. But he taught faithfully in his church the children that came to that church. And he influenced those children and shared with them God's love, shared with them the truth of the Bible, and shared things into their lives. One of those children was Billy Graham. So that person, that Sunday school teacher, he didn't have the influence to touch millions of people in where he was, but he was faithful in what he did, in the role that he'd been given, in touching the lives of the people that were around him. And in doing that, he was able to plant seeds and sow seeds into one of the greatest evangelists this world has ever seen. So we need to be we need to be careful and not discount ourselves and say, God, I'm not good enough. God, I don't know enough of the Bible. I don't pray well enough to be an influencer. God says to you, if you submit to me, you will be an influencer. I will give you the words. We don't know what God's going to do with the words that we use and the things that we speak. We don't know how he's going to touch somebody's life with just an act of kindness. I thought it was great to hear from Paul and Jen about the things that had happened this week, where that man had shared his lunch. What kind of impact did that have on the person who received the food, on that lady? It's going to have an influence on her. That's something she will remember, most likely, for quite a while. But it also had an impact on the others in the train. Jen said that the atmosphere changed. Because one person was willing to care and show an act of love. And likewise with Paul, and the way that he touched and spoke to that person, was able to, just reach out to that person and concentrate and focus on the person right there, that was right in front of him. There's Heidi Baker's got a charity called Stop for the One. I don't know if you know Heidi Baker. She's also a missionary, but she's got a charity called Stop for the One, which is to do with child sponsorship. Now, again, I'm not really here to promote Heidi Baker's charity, but I love the phrase "Stop for the One," because it's about stop for the one, stop for God, but it's also about taking time out for the people right in front of you. How many of us, we live southeast of England, is renowned for being unfriendly? Sadly. I don't know if that's what you guys found when you first came here, whether people ignored you, still try to. But sadly, it's the case. If you're on the train, people have either got their head in a book, on a phone, or just staring at their shoes. They don't engage with other people. And there have been experiments done, and I saw an experiment, a kind of psychological experiment done on the steps of Liverpool Street, where there was a person was basically on the steps of the Liverpool Street station outside, as if in need of assistance. And the number of people that just walked past, that just basically head in a book or look away and just carried on. Because we don't stop for the one. We're too busy. So let's not be too busy to be a blessing and an influence. I mentioned earlier on about the Sunday school teacher for Billy Graham, and I think just wanted to call this out. That the way that you influence somebody isn't always obvious, or the influence that you're going to have isn't always obvious. It's basically, as you know, when we speak words and when we show acts of love, we're sowing a seed. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. It might be that the word that we give is like the final piece in the puzzle. For those of you who watch Catchphrase, will the middle solve the riddle? But it's that thing of it might be that last piece, and then suddenly everything becomes clear. And suddenly, for the person who's that jigsaw puzzle, their life is suddenly they've got clarity, and we can see amazing things happen. But it could be that the word you speak, the act you do, that could be the first piece in the puzzle. You've got no idea. But does that mean because it's the first piece you shouldn't lay it down? Of course not. If God's given you a word of encouragement, a word of love, just something to care for somebody, we should give that, no matter what. Because we don't know what the result will be. It may not be obvious. We may never see it. But it doesn't matter. I think this was the verse then that was on screen, which is, Then Jesus said, God's kingdom is like a seed thrown on a field by a man. Next one. Who goes to bed and forgets about it. I'm just going to stop there for a second. You don't have to hold on to all the seeds that you sow. You know, this guy threw some seed out and went to bed and forgot about it. And then, but the seed, it sprouted and it grows, and the man has no idea how it happens. He doesn't need to. The earth does it all without his help. First a green stem of grass, then a bud, then the ripened grain. The point is that we just have to sow the seed. We don't have to worry about what's going to happen after that point. The other thing is that when we sow seeds, when we influence people, when we are blessing to people, the results aren't always instant. Now, we live in an instant world. We live, where Amazon Prime will deliver to you sometimes on the same day. You can get pretty much whatever you want within 24 hours. Or we live in a world where you can pour some hot water into either a cup of instant coffee or a pot noodle, and you've effectively got some sort of sustenance, if you want to call it that, fairly much immediately. We live in a world where everything is instant, but our influence isn't always instant. If you look at nature, it's not instant. I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. I don't know if you're familiar with the Chinese bamboo. When the farmer plants the seed, he puts it into the ground and he waters it and he fertilizes it. And he will wait for a whole year and not see anything. And the plant won't sprout. And I don't know, if that was me, I'd probably be like, well, that's had it. That's not going to come up. Because nothing happens the second year either. By which point I'd just given up completely. It doesn't happen in the third year either, or the fourth year. 4 years without seeing any evidence of the seed being planted. But in the fifth year, if the seed has been nourished throughout those 4 years, within the space of about 2 months, the bamboo will come out of the ground and it will shoot up to about the size of a tree. In 2 months. We don't know when we plant a seed when the fruit will come. We don't need to worry about it. We need to be like the farmer who forgets about it and just lets the earth crack on and do it. Because God will use the words that we speak if we speak his love. So just to wrap up then, in closing. You have influence. You are born to be a blessing and influencer to change this world. Changing the world doesn't necessarily mean having to do everything in one go. I'm sure you've heard the story of the man walking down the beach, which is there's been a whole load of fish thrown up onto the beach through some kind of freak storm or whatever, and the guy's bending down, picking up a fish, throwing it into the sea. Bending down, picking up a fish and throwing it into the sea. And somebody else says to him, "Look at all these fish here. What are you doing? What is the point? What difference is it going to make?" And the guy says, "Well, it makes a difference to that one, and it makes a difference to that one." And that's what I want to encourage you, is that you can be an influencer to the people around you, and you can make a positive difference in their lives. You don't know what other influences are coming into their lives. A bit like that ball we saw bouncing around. You don't know how they're being pushed around and where they're being shoved. And they may have had dreams and destinies and where they were planning to go to, but it may be that they've been knocked and kind of they've been just knocked backwards. And you may have seen with the balls, it got close to the goal, it just ended up going backward. But you can be the one who gives a positive influence and pushes them forward. You can be the one who gives an encouraging word. And you don't know how God's going to use those words, but you don't need to worry about it. To be an influencer, you just need to show a genuine care and interest in the people around you. You just need to walk with God, be who God has created you to be, but to stop for the one. Because God has called us to be a blessing, transforming our world into a better place. And we positively influence our world when we express God's love, grace, hope, and goodness and joy to everyone we meet. So I just want to encourage you this week, go out and be a positive influence on the world around you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Bless you, Tim. That was excellent. Should we stand to our feet?